Thank you for joining us for this Prairie Tales podcast. Our wagon train to the past is taking us to the prairie in 1871. We will be stopping for a few nights in Newton, Kansas, which at the time was called the wickedest part of hell. This episode is sponsored by Dr. William Beck, owner of the Axtell Eye Center, overlooking the old Chisholm Trail in Newton, Kansas. If you're having trouble reading the trail markers along the way, then Dr. Beck is the man to see about it. A big shout out goes to Dr. Beck and his staff at the Axtell Eye Center for their support of Prairie Tales.
The Wild West. It conjures up images, doesn't it? Dusty streets, sudden violence.
Yeah.
And this idea of maybe, dying so fast you're buried with your boots on.
That phrase itself, dying with your boots on, is so evocative, really sets a scene.
It does. And today, we're heading to Newton, Kansas, specifically to its first burial ground, which had that very stark name, Boot Hill.
Right. And we've got some fascinating sources for this, actual newspaper articles from the time, first-hand accounts.
Exactly. These give us a real window into what people were saying and thinking back then. Now, Newton's our main stop, but these papers also mention similar spots, places like Sheridan, Hays City, Dodge City.
So it wasn't just a one-off thing in Newton. This Boot Hill concept was around.
Seems like it. Okay, so Newton, we're talking early days, right around 1871, wild times.
The very beginning for the town, really, a boomtown environment.
And this Boot Hill, it wasn't just some vague area. The papers give a location, the south side of East First Street. And the name Boot Hill, well, it came, maybe unsurprisingly, from the sheer number of people buried there who, quote, died with their boots on.
That phrase again, it just hammered home the nature of death there, sudden, violent often.
Totally. And listen to this quote from the Olith Mirror in March 1872. It said, "Men die in Newton before they take sick."
Wow, that's blunt. Tells you everything almost.
Doesn't it? And just before that, the Brown County World reported that since the previous August, so just a few months, 20 men had been buried in Newton.
20 men.
And every single one, according to the paper, died with their boots on.
So these newspaper reports really emphasize the type of death happening, not illness, not old age.
No, exactly. It was primarily violence.
Yeah.
Shooting scrapes, as one account put it.
Whose account was that?
A guy named Henry Brunner. He ran a restaurant in Newton starting back in May 71. He remembered it well.
Someone who was right there seeing it happen.
Absolutely. He estimated, looking back in 1921, that maybe 24 men buried in Boot Hill were killed in those kinds of incidents.
24. That he could recall.
Yeah. He even remembered the town's first marshal, Bailey, actually dying from a gunshot wound right in his restaurant.
In his restaurant. Good grief.
He said, and this is a direct quote, "Shooting and killing was an every Saturday night occurrence."
Every Saturday night. Just routine. That's hard to wrap your head around.
Isn't it? He also recalled some specific incidents, killings by a Marshall Johnson, Holiday, and Fitzpatrick. And this big fight in Hyde Park, he remembered 7 killed, 14 wounded.
7 killed in one incident.
That's what he recalled, yeah. He even mentioned Buffalo Bill being marshal for a bit, and a guy named McCluskey being the first killed in what they call the massacre. It just sounds incredibly volatile.
It really paints a picture of constant tension, maybe punctuated by these bursts of extreme violence.
And another paper, the Evening Kansan Republican in 1903, kind of backs this up statistically. They said out of 32 burials they knew of in Boot Hill, only 2 were thought to have died naturally.
30 out of 32 from violence or accidents. That really tells the story of Boot Hill, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, so what happened to this place? It wasn't there forever.
No, these early burial grounds often weren't permanent fixtures. Things changed fast.
Right. So by the fall of 1873, apparently they started moving the bodies, those they could find anyway, move them to the current cemetery or maybe other places.
Makes sense. As the town became more established, they'd want a more formal cemetery, maybe move away from the raw reminder right there.
And get this later on, around 1915, that little knoll where Boot Hill was, they actually started using the dirt for fill.
Just digging it up and moving it? Wow. Shows how attitudes changed, or maybe how memory faded.
Or maybe both.
Yeah.
But then there's another twist. A doctor, J.T. Astell. He came to Newton as a young medical student in 1879.
Okay.
And he needed skeletons. for anatomical study.
Right, that was common practice, though maybe a bit unsettling to think about now.
Definitely. He actually got permission to open some of the remaining graves on that knoll, and he took out 3 skeletons.
He just exhumed them. Legally.
Apparently so. And years later, in 1915, he still had parts of one the skull, some bones at his hospital. Gave another skeleton to the Masonic Lodge.
Wow. So these remains were still around in a way. Did you find anything interesting about them?
Well, here's the kicker, especially given the name Boot Hill. He said the bodies were in wooden boxes, dressed in, everyday suits.
Okay. So not boots.
No boots. He found no boots on any of the 3 skeletons he exhumed.
Huh. So maybe dying with your boots on was more metaphorical. About dying suddenly, violently, while active, not literally being buried booted.
Seems plausible based on his findings, though he did identify one skeleton. Said it was a man named Martin, killed in that Newton massacre, based on the clothes he found.
So the violence was real, even if the footwear details were maybe more legend.
Exactly. But wait, the story gets even muddier, because another guy, L.H. Pershing, writing around the same time in 1915, had a totally different memory.
Oh. What did he say?
He claimed the real Boot Hill wasn't even where Axtell was digging. He said it was on the west side of Slate Creek, an area that later had trees planted, used as a pasture.
So a completely different location.
Yeah. He insisted the knoll being leveled wasn't a burial site at all.
That really throws a wrench in things, doesn't it? How could memories be so different?
It's confusing. And then another resident, John Walton, who'd been there since '73, remembered a wagon road going right across that knoll Axtell mentioned, near where someone named Perkins lived.
So Walden's memory seems to place activity on the knoll Axtell investigated.
Kind of. It really shows you how tricky history can be, especially relying on memory decades later. Different people remember different things, or maybe different places got called Boot Hill.
It's a good reminder that history isn't always a single, neat story. It's often pieced together from fragments, sometimes contradictory ones.
Definitely. Okay, so let's step back from Newton for a second, because as we said, these newspapers mention other Boot Hills in Kansas.
Right. It wasn't unique to Newton.
No. Sheridan, for instance. A paper in 1878 said their burial ground had 8 men who died suddenly with their boots on. And guess what they called it?
Let me guess. Boot Hill.
Boot Hill. Yep. Same name, same
It
reason.
really was a common frontier term then.
Seems like it. And Hayes City had one too. Described as being on a mound north of town, just a few stone or wooden markers.
How many buried there?
The paper in '77 said 37 victims of the pistol and the knife. Men who lived a wild adventure and, quote, died, to use a border phrase, with their boots on.
37. That's a lot too. It's grim, but it really paints a picture of these towns.
It does. And that same article mentions something really sad, a little child buried there too. Killed by a stray bullet during a street brawl.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. A reminder that it wasn't just the fighters who suffered. Innocent people got caught in the crossfire.
Yeah. But, like Newton's, the memory faded fast in Hayes City. By early 1878, another paper said only 3 graves were even identifiable anymore.
Just worn away by time and weather, probably.
Probably. And then just a month later, the paper reported that the land had been taken over by developers.
Oh, no.
Who had, and I quote, a large and well-assorted stock of skeletons to dispose of cheap.
Dispose of cheap. That's incredibly callous. Wow.
Dark, isn't it?
Yeah.
Shows how quickly things moved on, I guess. And then there's Dodge City.
The classic Wild West town. Did they have a Boot Hill?
They sure did.
Mm.
In 1877, the Dodge City Times was already wondering if anyone would even remember the people buried there by Decoration Day. The memory was fading fast.
Already forgotten, just a few years later, potentially.
And by the next year, 1878, that same paper reported Boot Hill, west of the city, was being sold off, probably to be turned into housing lots.
So built right over.
Sounds like it. The paper mentioned about 20 graves, mostly people who died violently or were too poor for a regular burial, and it described them rather vividly as a motley crowd of sinners waiting for Judgment Day.
Motley crowd of sinners. That's quite the epitaph from the local paper. It captures a certain attitude, maybe.
It really does. So looking back at all this, what do we take away?
Well, first, that Boot Hill wasn't just legend. It was real. These places existed, born out of the violence and rapid growth of towns like Newton.
Right. And while Dr. Axtell's findings suggest maybe people weren't literally buried in boots all the time.
The phrase perfectly captured that sudden, often violent end that was so common. It was symbolic, powerful symbolism.
And these newspaper accounts, they're incredible, aren't they? They give us these raw glimpses into the time, direct voices.
Absolutely. They let us hear how people talked about these events then, not through layers of later interpretation, but the immediate reactions.
So thinking about Newton, Hayes City, Dodge City, the way these boot hills appeared and then often quickly disappeared or were repurposed.
It really tells a story about the West itself, doesn't it? That rapid shift from raw frontier to something more settled, communities trying to maybe bury their turbulent past along with the bodies.
Yeah. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? About all those individual stories, the people who ended up in those unmarked graves on some dusty hill. What were their lives like before that sudden end?
And what does this whole cycle, the violence, the quick burials, the fading memory, the eventual erasure of the site, what does that tell us about how societies deal with the uncomfortable parts of their own history? How they remember and how they choose to forget?
Definitely something to think about. Those forgotten knolls hold more stories than just bones.